My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 35 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has introduced me the same way. This is Hannah. She's still trying to figure out her life. It never mattered who was asking. Neighbors, relatives, my parents' friends, even complete strangers. That sentence always came first, as if it explained everything anyone needed to know about me. The strange part was that nobody ever asked me if it was true. Last Saturday evening, my younger sister invited everyone to our parents' house to celebrate her engagement. The dining room looked like something from a magazine. Fresh flowers, white candles, the expensive china that only came out for special occasions. My mother walked from room to room making sure every napkin was perfectly folded. She treated family dinners the same way some people prepare for job interviews. Everything had to look perfect. Especially us. I arrived 10 minutes late after finishing work. I had washed my hands 3 times before leaving, but tiny traces of wood stains still rested around my fingernails. Years of careful work leave marks that soap can't completely erase. The moment I stepped inside, my mother noticed my hands. She sighed quietly. "You couldn't wear gloves today?" I smiled. "I already cleaned them." She looked disappointed anyway. "Go sit down before everyone gets here." That was how most conversations between us ended. Not with anger, just disappointment carefully wrapped in politeness. Dinner began exactly at 6. My father talked about the weather. My uncle complained about taxes. My sister Emily couldn't stop smiling beside her fiancé. Everyone admired the engagement ring. Everyone congratulated them. I truly was happy for her. Emily had always dreamed about this moment. Halfway through dinner, her fiancé turned toward me with a friendly smile. He seemed different from the rest of my family. He actually listened when people spoke.
"So, Hannah,
"What do you do?" The question floated gently across the table. Before I could answer, my mother's laugh interrupted us. "Oh, don't ask Hannah about work. She always makes it sound much more important than it really is." Several people laughed. Not because the joke was funny, because they already knew they were supposed to laugh. I looked down at my plate. This wasn't the first time. It probably wasn't even the 100th. Usually, I stayed quiet. I changed the subject. I let everyone believe whatever story they preferred. It was easier that way. But something inside me felt different that evening. Maybe I was simply tired. Tired of shrinking myself. Tired of pretending my life didn't matter. I placed my fork on the table, looked at Emily's fiancé, and answered calmly. "I restore things people believe are beyond saving." The table became unusually quiet. My mother forced another smile. "Hannah fixes old furniture. It's more of a hobby than a career." Before I could explain, the conversation quickly moved somewhere else. Vacation plans, wedding venues, guest lists, exactly the way it always did. Except one person hadn't stopped looking at me. Emily's fiancé. He studied my face for several seconds, almost as if he was trying to remember something. Then his expression suddenly changed. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, opened a photograph, and looked back at me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "But do you own Brooks Restoration Studio on Willow Street?" I felt my heartbeat stop for just a moment. "Yes, I do." He stared at me in complete disbelief. "My mother has been trying to find you for almost a year." Every voice around the dinner table disappeared. The room became completely silent. And for the first time in 35 years, every member of my family looked at me as if they had never actually known who I was. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. My mother was still holding the serving spoon above the bowl of potatoes. My father slowly lowered his glass without taking his eyes off me. Emily looked back and forth between her fiancé and me, completely confused. "What do you mean you've been looking for her?" she finally asked. Daniel glanced around the table. "I thought everyone here already knew." No one answered. He unlocked his phone and turned the screen toward me. The photograph showed a grand staircase inside a historic mansion. Every carved railing, every polished step, every detail was familiar. I had spent nearly 6 months restoring it. "You did this, didn't you?" Daniel asked. I nodded. "Yes." He smiled in disbelief. "My family's foundation owns that estate. We've been trying to contact the conservator who restored it. Our director said the work was the finest restoration completed in the last 20 years. My mother laughed nervously. "Oh, Hannah enjoys little projects like that." Daniel looked genuinely confused. Little projects? Hannah, that staircase won the State Heritage Preservation Award. The entire restoration community has been talking about it. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable silence. My father slowly looked toward me. You never told us that. I smiled politely. You never asked. No one laughed this time. Daniel continued speaking, completely unaware that he was changing the atmosphere inside the room. My mother wanted to invite you to lead another restoration. It's one of the oldest theaters in the state. The project could take almost a year. He paused before adding quietly, and honestly, she said there are only a handful of people capable of doing it. Emily stared at me. You restore buildings. I thought you repaired old chairs. I restore history. I answered softly. When people believe something is beyond saving, they bring it to me. For the first time in years, my own voice didn't sound uncertain. It sounded honest. Dinner never truly recovered after that. People kept trying to restart small conversations. Someone mentioned dessert. Someone else asked about the wedding. But the room had already changed. Every few minutes, I caught someone looking at me, not with pity, not with embarrassment, with curiosity. As dinner ended, Daniel walked beside me while everyone else moved into the living room. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your family talks about you as if you're still searching for a career. I smiled without looking at him. They've believed that story for a very long time. He hesitated. My mother asked me to find Hannah Brooks, the woman who could save a theater everyone else had given up on. He looked directly at me. I wasn't expecting those two people to be the same person. Before I could answer, my mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. Hannah, can I speak with you for a minute? Her smile was perfectly polite, but after 35 years, I knew exactly what that smile meant. She wasn't about to congratulate me. She was about to ask me for something. My mother waited until the kitchen door closed behind us. The voices from the living room became soft and distant. For a few seconds, she said nothing. She simply stood at the counter, carefully wiping a plate that was already clean. That was her habit whenever she was trying to control a conversation before it even began. Finally, she looked at me. You need to refuse that project. I blinked. I haven't even accepted it yet. Good, she replied quickly. Keep it that way. I searched her face, hoping I had misunderstood. Why? She took a slow breath. Because the theater is where your sister's wedding reception will be held next spring. I frowned. So, she repeated. You'll be there for months. Workers, scaffolding, dust, paint. People will see you climbing ladders while our guests are touring the venue. I stared at her. She continued as though everything she was saying was perfectly reasonable. Daniel's family has an excellent reputation. They move in very important circles. I don't want them thinking our family works construction. For a moment, I honestly didn't know what to say. I don't work construction. I answered quietly. I'm a historical conservator. She waved her hand as if the difference didn't matter. They won't understand that. They'll just see dirty clothes and tools. And first impressions stay with people. There it was. The sentence I had been hearing my entire life, not in those exact words, but always with the same meaning. It wasn't important who I really was. It only mattered how easy I was to explain. My mother stepped closer. Hannah, your sister has dreamed about this wedding since she was a little girl. Please don't make people ask questions. I looked down at my hands. The faint marks of varnish were still visible around my fingertips. I suddenly remembered something my grandfather had told me when I was 19. He had placed an old wooden music box on my workbench and smiled. People admire the finished piece, he said, but the hands that save it rarely stay clean. Back then, I thought he was only talking about restoration. Standing in my mother's kitchen, I realized he had been talking about life. I've spent 15 years building my career, I said calmly. I can't walk away from the biggest opportunity I've ever received. She folded her arms. I'll replace the money. The foundation is paying well, isn't it? I'll give you the same amount. I looked at her in disbelief. You'd pay me not to do the work. I'm protecting this family. No, I answered softly. You're protecting an image. Her expression hardened. Hannah, you've always been stubborn. I almost laughed. No one had ever called me stubborn before. Quiet, invisible, difficult to understand. Yes, but never stubborn. Maybe because this was the first time I wasn't giving in, I picked up my coat from the chair. I'm gonna think about the project. My mother nodded, believing she had won. She had heard those words from me many times before. She thought they meant maybe. But as I walked toward the front door, I already knew the truth. The next morning, I would accept the project, and neither of us realized that one decision would quietly change everything our family believed about me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. My workshop was silent except for the old wall clock my grandfather had restored 40 years earlier. I unlocked the front door, switched on the lights, and stood there for a long moment. The smell of wood varnish and old paper had always felt more like home than the house I grew up in. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Daniel's mother. "Good morning, Hannah. I hope I'm not calling too early?" "Not at all," I replied. She didn't waste time. "Our board met this morning. The theater restoration begins next month. We would be honored if you accepted the project." I looked around the workshop. Every tool hanging on the wall had taught me something. Every finished piece reminded me that broken things deserved another chance. So did people? I'd be honored to accept. There was a brief silence. Then she smiled through the phone. "I had a feeling you'd say that. We'll send the contract this afternoon." When the call ended, I didn't feel nervous. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Proud. Not because of the money, not because of the recognition. Because, for the first time, I had chosen my own future instead of someone else's expectations. A week later, the restoration officially began. The old Grand Ashton Theater had stood in the center of the city for almost 120 years. Its ceiling was covered with faded paintings. The balconies had deep cracks. The stage had survived fires, floods, and decades of neglect. Most people saw an abandoned building. I saw a story waiting to be told again. My team built the first scaffold beneath the enormous ceiling. Every morning, I climbed higher until the city disappeared beneath me. Hours passed in complete silence. Brush after brush. Careful cleaning. Tiny repairs that nobody would ever notice individually. But together, they would bring the entire theater back to life. One afternoon, while I was documenting the ceiling, I noticed several people walking through the hall. Daniel was among them. So were his parents, and several members of the wedding planning team. They stopped directly beneath the scaffold. His mother looked up and smiled. "There she is." The woman beside her asked, "Who's that?" Daniel answered proudly, "She's the conservator restoring the entire theater." His words echoed across the empty hall. For a second, no one said anything. Then the wedding planner opened her notebook. "So she'll still be working here close to the wedding." Daniel's mother nodded. "And we're fortunate she is. Without her, this theater wouldn't be ready." I continued working quietly above them. But someone else had also heard that conversation. Standing near the entrance, watching me from across the hall, was my mother. She wasn't looking at the ceiling. She wasn't looking at the restoration. She was looking at me. And the expression on her face wasn't anger. It was fear. The kind of fear that appears when someone realizes the story they've told for years is about to fall apart. She turned around without saying a single word, walked back to her car, and drove away. Something told me that wouldn't be the last time she tried to stop me. The weeks passed quietly. Every morning I climbed the scaffold before the sun reached the theater windows. Every evening, I left with sore hands and the strange satisfaction that comes from watching something forgotten slowly come back to life. The theater was changing, and without realizing it, so was I. The faded paintings above the stage began to glow with their original colors. The carved balconies looked alive again. Visitors stopped walking when they entered the hall. Almost every person looked up before saying a single word. One afternoon, a television production team arrived. The foundation had partnered with a documentary series about restoring historic buildings across the country. They wanted to film the entire project from beginning to end. The producer introduced himself with a warm handshake. "We've heard wonderful things about your work. I'd love to interview you." I smiled politely. "I'd rather let the work speak for itself." He nodded. "I respect that. But people don't only connect with buildings. They connect with the people who save them." I thanked him but still declined. Being behind the camera had always felt safer than standing in front of it. A few days later, Daniel stopped by the workshop carrying coffee. He looked unusually serious. My mother asked me not to tell you this, but I think you deserve to know. I set my tools down. He hesitated. Your mother visited our house yesterday? My hands froze. She did? He nodded. She asked my parents if the documentary could avoid mentioning your name. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. She said the wedding should remain the focus. Daniel looked uncomfortable. My parents refused. They told her the restoration is the reason the theater looks the way it does. They said the person who did the work deserves the credit. I looked down at the unfinished wooden panel in front of me. For years, I believed my mother simply didn't understand my career. Now I realized something far more painful. She understood it. She just didn't want anyone else to. That evening, I stayed in the workshop long after sunset. The room was completely silent. I walked slowly past every piece waiting to be restored. An antique mirror, a grandfather clock, a carved rocking chair. Each one had survived because someone believed it was worth saving. I suddenly asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If I could spend my life saving broken objects, why was I still asking permission to save my own future? The answer came quietly. I wasn't anymore. The next morning, I signed every remaining document for the documentary. Not because I wanted attention, but because I was finally ready to stop hiding. I didn't know it then, but on my sister's wedding day, that decision would change all of our lives forever. The wedding arrived on a warm Saturday afternoon. The theater looked nothing like it had the first day I walked inside. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. The restored ceiling shimmered above the guests. Every painted detail had come back to life. For a few quiet moments I stood alone near the entrance and looked up. 9 months of work. Thousands of careful repairs, hundreds of hours on the scaffold. All of it was finally complete. The ceremony was beautiful. Emily looked genuinely happy. When she walked down the restored staircase, I smiled through tears. No matter what had happened between us, she was still my sister. After dinner, the documentary producer quietly approached me. The guests have been admiring the ceiling all evening. He smiled. We're filming one final segment. Would you be willing to tell everyone who restored this place? Before I could answer, my mother stepped between us. Her smile was perfect. She's needed for family photographs. She gently took my arm and led me into the hallway. The moment the ballroom door closed, her smile disappeared. Please? Not tonight. Don't make this wedding about yourself. I looked at her calmly. I never wanted it to be about me. Then refused the interview. You've stayed in the background your whole life. Just do it one more time. For the first time, I didn't lower my eyes. I've spent my whole life protecting everyone's comfort. I won't hide the truth anymore. She shook her head. If you do this, don't come back for Sunday dinner. The words hung between us. Years ago, that threat would have broken me. Now, it only made me sad. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I love you, Mom. But I can't spend the rest of my life pretending I don't exist. Without another word, I walked back into the ballroom. The lights dimmed. A spotlight slowly illuminated the restored ceiling. Every guest looked up in amazement. The producer smiled. And who is the artist behind this remarkable restoration? I took one slow breath. My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm a historical conservator. My team and I spent the last 9 months bringing this theater back to life. The room fell completely silent. Then applause filled every corner of the theater. People stood. Some wiped away tears. Daniel smiled proudly. Emily looked up at the ceiling, then back at me. For the first time in her life, she saw me exactly as I was. Not the sister who was still figuring things out, but the woman who had rebuilt the room where her happiest day would always be remembered. My father walked over after the camera stopped rolling. He hugged me without saying a word. Sometimes, silence can finally say the right thing. Later that night, I noticed my mother standing alone near the exit. She looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she looked at me. She didn't apologize. She simply nodded once, before quietly leaving the theater. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real families rarely have one. But the next Monday morning, my workshop phone never stopped ringing. Museums, historic churches, private collectors, universities. People from across the country wanted to work with me. A year later, I hired 2 apprentices. The workshop had more work than I could ever have imagined. Emily visited often, not because she needed anything, but because she genuinely wanted to understand the work she had ignored for so many years. My father came every Wednesday with coffee. We talked about life, about old wood, about second chances. And my mother, one rainy afternoon, a small package arrived at the workshop. Inside was an old porcelain teacup, broken cleanly into 4 pieces. There was no letter, only a small note. If you have time. No signature. She didn't need one. I carefully repaired the cup. I didn't hide the cracks. I filled them with fine gold, making them part of its story instead of something to be ashamed of. When I mailed it back, I included only one sentence. Some things become stronger after they're broken. Today, when strangers ask what I do for a living, I answer without hesitation. My name is Hannah Brooks. I restore history. And I've learned that you don't need everyone to believe in your worth. Sometimes, you only need the courage to stop hiding it yourself.